and their epigony tend to be disappointing, but an ex-chief of state can be something else. Harold Macmillan observes the formalities. He won't comment on current controversies in which his former colleagues are engaged, but he will expatiate on the meaning of it all from the vantage point of an elder statesman who dignifies the term. In the course of the hour, he came as close as anyone on firing line to mesmerizing the entire studio. This fragment is purely suggestive.
And I remember asking, I think the most experienced man in the whole of our service, who'd been by then 40 years, Sudan, Africa, everywhere. And I'd just attended a meeting of the council just before this step was to be taken, or not. And I said, are these people fit for self-government? He said, no, of course they're not, Prime Minister. Are they fit for independence? I said, no, he said, of course they're not. So what would you advise me to do? He said, give it them at once. And I said, but why? He said, because. I said, when will they be fit? He said, 15, 20 years. So why not wait? No, he said, because they'll be wasted years. They won't learn any more. They'll all be in rebellion. All the most intelligent people here I shall have to lock up. They won't spend it in learning more about the art of government. They'll simply spend it in prison. So the only thing now to do is to go on with it. But that was from a man who was the most, I wasn't a radical sort of extreme. He was the most experienced type of chap who lived all his life in it. He said, if they would spend the next 15 years learning, let them go on learning, but they won't, because all the intelligent people here, with the two wars, with the emotion of the world, they're determined to have it. And therefore they'll be wasted. We shall go back. We shall be worse than when we began.
And do you think he was right?
Absolutely right. We've been through all this. I used to say that people write and say how terrible it is that there's some trouble in an independent country. Well, what about our own? We murdered our king. We fought civil wars. We had the most bitter battles before we could get into a state of believing in some fair and reasonable government. You can't expect them suddenly to emerge. All you can do is to do your duty, to give them the greatest economic background you can, to teach them justice, to give them courts, to set up a best organization you can. And they'll make mistakes. But some won't, and they'll learn. But it's their country, it's not our country.
I don't suppose you want to anticipate any of the revelations of your forthcoming volume.
I've tried to write in this volume the story of a very extraordinary period in our history of Britain, 50 years, roughly. 1914 to 64. My childhood, 60 years. I was born in the age of the horse. Our home, drove down a dog cart to the station. The horse walked around, pumped up the water. And I end in the age of the jet plane.
Which doesn't, the Concorde, yeah.
Well, now, nothing as this ever happened in the world before. When Sir Robert Peel, when William IV dismissed his Lord Melbourne's cabinet, Sir Robert Peel was in Italy. And there was a great effort to get him back quickly. It was calculated, it was before the railways, it took him a little longer than it would have taken a Roman messenger from Rome to London, because the roads weren't quite so good as they had it. Well, you see, in 50 years, the whole thing's changed. Democracy's come, classes have changed. With Europe, it will be one of the great powers of the world. By itself, it's a very powerful force. And almost you forget that it's never been a great power except for 100 years in its history. People talk about England, well, they really mean England between the Treaty of Vienna, between the Battle of Waterloo and the outbreak of the First World War. What was Elizabethan England? 2 million people, barbarous, regarded by the world as more or less on the outer edge of barbarity. And they stood up to Philip, who owned Spain, the Netherlands, practically all the old world, and claimed all the new. What was the England of Marlborough? Our population was 8 million, France 25 million. But with the alliances, with the arrangements, we not only won, but defeated him, but held out. What was Napoleon? England's population was 10 million. Napoleon had under his command the whole of the great French population, 30 million, and the whole of Europe. So did Hitler. Oh, no, you can't be so small that you're negligible. But size, wealth are not so important, although they are important, as courage and faith. But I've always thought that the peoples of the old Europe, having twice in my lifetime destroyed themselves by a kind of internecine war, like the Greeks did in the Peloponnesian War, must now get together. And if they work together, not so much only economically, which I think is a quite small part of it, but spiritually, politically, they can be play a role similar to that of the United States, and much more valuable to the peace and fortunes of the world